Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, America has removed a special trade status for Hong Kong as it claims the region is no longer autonomous from China. What are the practical implications for business and finance following this dramatic intervention? And Britain and the European Union have kicked off a fourth round of talks on a post-Brexit trade deal. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has insisted that he will not extend the transition period. And with talks at a standstill, has a no-deal exit become the inevitable? Then later, remote healthcare has become a critical component in keeping medical facilities safe during the COVID-19 pandemic. What's the likelihood of telemedicine finally disrupting the health sector? I'll be asking Edward Booty, the CEO of Reach 52, a digital healthcare platform. Before those discussions, here's our business correspondent Simon Pusey with a breakdown of the biggest business stories trending in Britain this week. Simon, it appears as if the wheels of the British economy are finally beginning to turn this week.
Yeah, so this all comes really from June the 1st when lockdown restrictions were eased, another part of this reopening plan. And what seems to have happened is that outdoor markets and car showrooms have been allowed to open, so trying to get the sort of motor industry back on track. And also, those sort of small shops that you see in markets, and also schools, primary schools being allowed to reopen, albeit partially with years 1 and 6 going back, which some people have sort of questioned why they've chosen those years. But it has meant that obviously people can go back to work if their children are back in school, and it makes that a little bit easier. And a lot of people across the UK, we love IKEA, don't we? I mean, that people seem to absolutely
the
adore
Swedish
IKEA.
Furniture brand, just in case anyone hasn't been lucky to go there.
Other stores are available, but
yes.
They've reopened, so 19 of their stores. And if you've been to IKEA, you'll know that it's sort of kind of easy. It's one-way system. It's kind of easy to social distance. You've got those big aisles there. So 19 of those stores opening, and people seem to have gone crazy for that, queuing up at 5 a.m. to try and get in. There's new footfall data which sort of backs up what you're saying, that the economy seems to start going in the right direction. This is the Retail Analyst Springboard, which says there's been a sharp rise in the number of shoppers as a result of those restrictions being eased. Shopper numbers up 36% on last week's bank holiday Monday and 21% on the week before that. High streets seeing the largest increase, with footfall up 44% on the week before. So that's obviously all good news, but there is always bad news, especially from these bigger companies coming in, companies that are wondering, are we going to reopen, or how are we going to reopen, especially in the restaurant trade. So the owners of Frankie and Benny's and Garfunkel's, they're set to tell staff that a large number of their stores won't reopen when it comes to it. One of Britain's largest sandwich making firms, Adeli Foods, they've ceased trading. That's 2,000 employees who are wondering whether they're going to keep their jobs. EasyJet, they are out of the FTSE Top 100, or at least they're going to be. So, these big companies that are really affected by the coronavirus, and people going to restaurants or people traveling in the case of air firms, they are the ones that are still struggling. But I think the next stage is the 15th of June. That's when all non-essential retailers will be allowed to open. So those are your shops and your restaurants that you don't yet see open. They're going to open in 2 weeks' time. It's going to be interesting really to see then what that does for the economy. A lot of people looking at that as kind of like one of the big stages when you can go to your shops as normal.
Absolutely, that will be D-Day, won't it? Simon Pusey, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Here's some other business news from across the globe. Major protests and lootings have taken place across the US in response to the death of George Floyd at the hands of a white police officer. Civil unrest has swept across the entire country, with many states declaring a state of emergency. There are concerns that the demonstrations could be a negative catalyst for stocks. The mass gatherings could lead to a second wave of COVID-19 cases, and the destruction of property in a number of communities and cities could further damage the already fragile US economy. US President Donald Trump has ordered his administration to begin the process of eliminating special trade treatment for Hong Kong in response to China imposing new national security legislation on the territory.
China's latest incursion, along with other recent developments that degraded the territory's freedoms, makes clear that Hong Kong is no longer sufficiently autonomous to warrant the special treatment that we have afforded the territory since the handover. China has replaced its promised formula of one country, two systems with one country, one system. Therefore, I am directing my administration to begin the process of eliminating policy exemptions that give Hong Kong different and special treatment.
Pointing to the anti-police brutality protests in the US, on Tuesday, Hong Kong's leader Carrie Lam accused foreign governments of double standards in their reaction to Beijing's plans.
When it comes to the statements from foreign countries who have made lofty reactions and threatened to put into place certain measures, all I can do is remind them that they are adopting double standards. They are highly concerned about their own national security, but when it comes to our national security, especially the situation in Hong Kong, they look through tinted glasses. People can see this double standard very clearly when looking at how the riots were handled in the US by local authorities, and how it compares to the stance they took when almost the same kind of riots took place in Hong Kong last year.
For more on this, joining me via Skype in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, is market analyst Han Tan from Forex Time Limited. Donald Trump says that he'll be removing the special trading status with Hong Kong. He says it's because of the autonomy, but during the press conference, there were a few digs at China. A lot of analysts say this is not going to affect China. This is simply going to hurt US business and Hong Kong business.
Well, based on Friday's press conference, or so-called press conference by President Trump, it seemed to hold more bark and more than bite. But the details are still rather lacking right now. Now, if it does go through, depending on what actually transpires on the policy front, it could have a negative effect on Hong Kong's economic outlook, and also, I think, more importantly for the markets, its status as a financial and trading hub. So it's very much a wait-and-see game right now until we find out more details about those proposed policies.
It is wait and see, but Carrie Lam, she was pretty tough in her response to Trump's move. But Hong Kong is in a little bit of an economic trouble, isn't it? 5.3%, that's how much their economy fell in Q1. They had the protests last year, then you got the pandemic, then you've got Xi's move. Do you think this could spell more economic trouble for them, considering the protesters are not stopping from gathering on the streets?
Right. I think, to be precise, it's the reaction more than the action itself from policymakers that is perhaps leading to the downward prospects for the city's economy. Because if you look at 2019, before the coronavirus pandemic, Hong Kong's recession for the year was due to those drawn-out protests, and that curtailed tourism, retail sales, of course, and the services sector as a whole. So if we see a similar duration for the protests this year, then it's going to really inhibit the economy's ability to stage a post-pandemic recovery.
There has been some condemnation from across the world, none as tough as Trump's. No surprising there, really. Britain, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has had a pretty tough stance. He's also said that he's happy to give residential status to those who hold Hong Kong passports. But how important is the economy of Hong Kong to the rest of the world?
Yeah. In short, it is very important because Hong Kong is seen as a gateway into China, broader China, for global investors. Keep in mind that Hong Kong follows international standards for, say, governance, for example. So that's why many MNC and global institutions set up a presence in Hong Kong. Here's a number for you to latch on to. There are over 700 U.S. companies that have either regional headquarters or an overseas office right there in Hong Kong. So if this aura around Hong Kong is either chipped away or just swiftly eradicated, then it really raises the bar on foreign entities that want to access the tremendously massive Chinese market by way of Hong Kong.
Trade negotiators from the UK and the EU embarked on a fourth round of post-Brexit negotiations on Tuesday, with little expectation of a substantial breakthrough. The UK is not expected to ask for any extension to the post-Brexit transition, and so is on the track to leave the single market and EU customs union on the 31st of December. If no trade deal is in place by then, experts predict severe disruption to businesses already reeling from a coronavirus pandemic that no one expected when the UK voted to leave the Union in June 2016. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Femi Oluwole, a British political activist. Do you think that Prime Minister Boris Johnson has backed himself in the corner by almost making it illegal to extend the transition period?
Well, the thing is, he wrote it into law that basically we have to leave fully at the end of this year and not have an extended transition period. But he has a majority of 80 seats in Parliament. If he wanted to change that law, he can do it one day to the next. So it's essentially trying to make it look like he had no option but to go for no deal when in fact he has all the power.
It's interesting you say that. I think the negotiations kicked off on Tuesday. I believe there was a vote in the Irish Parliament and they said that they believe it should be extended. Most people in the EU have accepted Brexit, but say, come on, this is ridiculous. We're in a global pandemic. How can we focus on this issue when there are wider issues? Why do you think Boris Johnson is deciding to be so stubborn?
Because he staked his entire policies on it. He's Mr. Brexit. He's Mr. Take Back Control. He ran his election on get Brexit done. I must deliver this oven-ready deal. Now, unfortunately, the situation we're in right now is that the deal that he signed in December, the deal that they signed before December, and he sold to the British people in that election, calling it oven-ready, is actually something he's now disagreeing with. That deal includes a provision on a level playing field. What that basically means is we're going to have free trade with the EU, and in order to avoid any unfair competition, we need to have the similar rules on competition, social rights, so there's no unfair advantage between UK businesses and EU businesses. Now, right now, he's disagreeing with that. He's refusing to accept any kind of level playing field because he promised people there would be a clean break from Europe. Now, what that means is we're now stuck in a complete loggerheads between the two parties, the EU and the UK, because Boris Johnson doesn't agree with his own deal.
I presume you are still kind of anti-Brexit, but has the pandemic changed your views at all?
No, not even slightly, because in 2018, the British Medical Association, that's an organisation that represents over 160,000 doctors across the UK, said that a no-deal Brexit would make us more vulnerable to, quote, deadly pandemics. Now, they were quite prophetic with that, given that that's what happened a couple of years later. And now to allow a no-deal Brexit, which we know would make us significantly more vulnerable to this, now would be a very, very bad course of action. And especially given that earlier this year, we saw the supermarket shelves empty because people were panic buying, given that 1/3 of all the food consumed in the UK comes from EU countries, and a no-deal Brexit would mean significant barriers to trade that would compromise 1/3 of our food supply. Boris Johnson has explicitly said that if there was a no-deal Brexit, he would impose full customs checks on everything coming from the EU. That would damage our food supply at a time of national crisis.
You've mentioned, Femi, the health implications. You also mentioned food. What would you say are some of the other serious consequences of a no-deal Brexit at the end of the year? I've got to say, particularly for our community, we're seeing the riots that are taking place stateside and in the UK. There's also been that report, hasn't it, about COVID-19 directly, disproportionately affecting us much more. Do you think we could also see the downside of a no-deal Brexit, or does it just affect everybody in Britain?
So whenever there is economic adversity, it affects those at the economic bottom worse than anyone else. And it affects those who are already vulnerable to anything more than anybody else. Now, in 2016, after the Brexit referendum, there was the sharpest rise in hate crime of any event caused by any political event in the last 10 to 15 years. We saw a serious spike in hate crime largely because a lot of the Brexit rhetoric was driven by racist politicians. Now, right now, to allow a no-deal Brexit to happen would essentially send things into overdrive, because if there is less stuff to go around, if people are more desperate for food, then it's those who are already struggling who will be pushed over the edge. So that will affect the poorest communities. And as we've seen in the BAME reports, that will often disproportionately affect Black people.
Coming up on Channel's Business Global, how disruptive could remote healthcare become in the well-established medical facilities market? I'll be asking Ed Booty, the CEO of the digital health platform Reach 52. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Some company news for you now. Zoom Video Communications raised its full-year revenue forecast on Tuesday, riding on a surge in the use of its video conferencing platform as people turn to virtual meetings to stay connected and work remotely amid broader stay-at-home measures. The company raised its full-year outlook to $1.8 billion from $905 million expected previously. The Daily Mail owner DMGT said the COVID-19 pandemic caused revenue at its consumer media business to fall by a third in April and by an estimated 30% in May, compared to the same periods last year. The British company said that despite sharp falls in advertising and circulation caused by the lockdown, the consumer unit would be close to breaking even this month, demonstrating the strength of its print titles and Mail Online website. It reported flat revenue for the half year ending in March, before most of the impact of the coronavirus crisis. Hungarian low-cost airline Wizz Air grew profits by 30% in the year to the end of March 2020, but said that it could not provide guidance for this year because of the coronavirus pandemic, which has heavily restricted air travel. Wizz Air posted underlying net profit of €344.8 million, slightly behind its forecast of €350 million and higher than the €265 million it made in the previous year. Now over to our next discussion. Before the coronavirus pandemic, industry experts had predicted that remote healthcare innovation held great promise. But since the crisis, the market has accelerated beyond what any economist could have forecast. Is this just a flash in the pan? Well, let's ask Ed Booty, the CEO of the digital health platform Reach 52. Ed Booty, thanks so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I've got to say, digital healthcare has seen an immense growth over the past couple of months. Of course, this has been spurred by the pandemic, but in Africa, we have seen telehealth pretty prominently over the past couple of years. What would you say is the reality behind the sensational headlines?
Oh, there is no doubt that telehealth is booming. It is a great sector for investors. It is a great sector for people that need to access healthcare, and it is increasing rapidly. If you look to America, Medicare has approved it. If you look to Philippines, where we do a lot of work, they've completely relaxed the rules and allowed e-prescriptions, allowed teleconsultations for the first time ever. So yeah, the regulation is really relaxing to facilitate access to essential health services through telehealth.
It's interesting you mentioned America, because in the global north, you know what we're like in the West. We do like to be cuddled and we like to see our GP. But even here in London, recently, GPs have been telling people to stay away. Even if you don't like the idea of using technology, you've had to, and it has saved a lot of time, and it has made GP practices safer. But do you think that this could potentially just be a flash in the pan? That once the pandemic's over, once there's a vaccine, people will go back to the traditional way of having a consultation?
I think online telehealth services will always have to be combined with on-the-ground services. Diagnostics or screening will always have to be done in person. So it's really about listening to patients and listening to communities about what they need, and designing that as a part digital and part offline service. Do I think telehealth will be here for a while? Yes, but do I think there will be more offline or non-telehealth services as well? Of course. But when you think about it from a resident point of view, so we're working in very rural areas and supporting very rural patients. They simply haven't been able to access care before. So we've had some people that just simply couldn't access a doctor before COVID. They were too far, they were too rural. Now, through our service, we've set up telehealth services, and for the first time ever, they're able to speak to a doctor, but you have to combine that with an integrated model of access to medicines and access to other physical services that go far beyond just telehealth itself.
I spoke about sub-Saharan Africa at the top of the questions here and the growth of telehealth there. You're based in Asia, and even though, of course, it's needed everywhere, some would say that Southeast Asia has been used as a beacon of hope in terms of the way it handled COVID-19. There may be some controversial data coming from China, but it did seem to curb it pretty quickly. Why did you choose that particular region?
Yeah, so correct. I am based in Singapore. We operate across Philippines, Cambodia, and we're starting to work in Africa as well, across various countries. Philippines, or in general, and Southeast Asia, is a hugely digitally literate population. So Facebook and WhatsApp and other social media platforms are massively used by millions upon millions of people as the sort of predominant form of internet access. So when it comes to communications about prevention here in Singapore, it's all done on WhatsApp by the government. If it comes to connecting people to telehealth, the populations are just sort of able to consume digital services quicker. And you combine that with good prevention policy, closing the borders and all the other measures we hear about, and you end up with a very, very robust response. I think, for example, Vietnam has recorded no deaths at all, even though their health system is comparatively weak to somewhere like the UK or America.
Has the pandemic, Ed, changed your mode of business? Have you looked at expanding in certain areas? Has this made you put a microscope on just what's working, what's not working, how the world is looking at access in healthcare because of COVID?
Yeah, absolutely. Our business has fundamentally changed, and to an extent for the better. So we've embraced telehealth, as mentioned already. We've connected residents when the regulation's been relaxed to doctors for the first time ever. But we've also been using, say, Facebook chatbots, so connecting individuals through Facebook Messenger, so they can just chat, do a COVID symptom check, they can get health information, they can do health checks all through conversations, and we're automating that with using technology that we've built. Thousands upon thousands of users in the first week alone, continuing to scale, now in 15 languages, and we're launching it in 3 African countries this month, with more in the pipeline as well. And I guess beyond that as well, we do also offer access to medicines to our communities. We've got over 500 discounted medicines already available, which was above our annual target, so businesses want to help. And then we can grow even further. I think we're looking at about 2,000 discounted medicines that we can make available at the moment. Again, just showing how the business community in the pharmaceutical sector is fundamentally changing to support lower income communities access healthcare as well.
Absolutely. We've seen that even with Zoom and their results earlier this week. Lastly, Ed, because we're running out of time. Firstly, actually, I've got to ask you what countries in Africa you will be going to. And also, I want to touch on Africa because that's where the vast majority of our viewers are. And you spoke about the digitization and the readily accessibility to technology in Southeast Asia. That's not the case in Africa and many of the rural communities that so desperately need this sort of help. How do you plan to get over that massive hurdle?
Yes, so that's 2 parts to the question. So firstly, in terms of African countries, we really are working with a number of regional development partners that operate across Africa. We're looking at 15 countries in total, likely starting with Kenya, Senegal, but also looking at Uganda and a number of other countries, but all in partnership with a couple of local partners. And quite rightly so. Within the Philippines, one of our main countries, about 60% of our communities simply do not have access to the internet. So as much as chatbots are great and telehealth is great, we also combine that with offline services. So that's Android apps used by women in the community. Normally we train a woman in a community that we work in. The app doesn't need the internet at all. They can provide health information, support, organize events, and cater to your non-digital users, such as perhaps older people or those that can't afford a phone, but also cater to villages that simply don't have the internet. So really, our model is an end-to-end platform that goes from the very advanced digital right through to sort of offline technology and offline applications that are used by one or two members in the community to really provide support for those communities that don't have internet access as well.
Well, Ed Booley, what a great way to make a little bit of money, or lots, might I say. Maybe the next time I talk to you, you could be a unicorn. But thank you so much, Ed Booley, for joining us on Channels Business Global. You didn't mention Nigeria, but I'm sure after this airs, Nigeria may be at the top of your list. Thank you, Ed. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.